services. Can you start by just telling me a bit about yourself, introduce yourself, let us know where you work and what you're doing?
Thanks so much for having me, Allison. I'm Courtney Malengo, the founder of Spark and Buzz Communications, and that is a strategic communications consultancy that helps businesses tell their story to inspire audiences and galvanize growth. And we do that through a variety of integrated branding, marketing, and public relations solutions.
Awesome. I know that kind of branching out and having your own company is that's not where you started. So can you tell us a bit about where you started in the field of aging and what drew you to that?
Sure. I think, like a lot of people, I didn't necessarily set out to get into aging services. It wasn't ever really on my radar. But, growing up, I had a really close relationship with my grandfather. I mean, he was really kind of my best friend when I was a kid. And so um, I started my career really in journalism and then kind of evolved into broader, marketing, corporate comms, PR, later branding. And I had an opportunity to work at the Village at Rockville, with National Lutheran Communities and Services. And at the time, they were just a single site retirement community. And so I joined the team to help, do marketing. And I really found that over time, I could see how I could help advocate for older adults. And it made me think a lot about my grandfather, like that personal connection, I think enabled me to have a lot more empathy for older adults and some of the challenges that they were facing, but also seeing how, when we are able to advocate for older adults in any of these circumstances, like that helps everybody. So I really kind of, leaned into that. And I worked for National Lutheran for about a decade before I went out on my own and started Spark and Buzz. My son was a big impetus for kind of why I made the leap. I loved everything I did at National Lutheran and loved the company. I just didn't want to have to never see my kid. It's hard when you have to kind of pick between your career and your kid. And so I didn't want to have to choose. I just wanted to do both. And so that's how Spark and Buzz began.
I think any mom or any parent who's listening totally gets that. It's a challenge trying to figure out how you integrate your home life and your work life, and there's never a perfect balance. But it sounds like you have created kind of a work life integration that works for you.
Yeah, for sure.
If you had to describe your current role in one sentence, what would you say?
I would say, I mean, my primary role is, I think in its simplest form, helping businesses and brands tell their story and communicate more effectively. Everything kind of goes back to that.
Yeah, for sure. You shared a bit about um, your first kind of role in the field at National Lutheran, but it sounds like you started off in journalism. So, what did you think that you were going to be doing? What did you want to be doing with journalism when you studied journalism, and then kind of how did you end up doing more marketing and comms?
Yeah. So when I was in high school, I worked on the school newspaper and I had an internship with a local news publication here in Maryland. And I was like, this is what I want to do. I want to go be a journalist. And so that's what I was going to go to school for. Um, when I went to college, they ended up changing some of the majors that we had. And so journalism was not like a primary concentration anymore. It was like you could do English and you could do then different parts. So I went on to do English writing with a communications minor. And I thought that maybe, I would want to go live in New York City and like climb my way up the corporate journalism ladder and become an editor of, a publication someday. And after college, I moved back home and I realized that was just very, I think, unrealistic for me and probably just the lifestyle that I wanted. Journalism was very cutthroat, very challenging. And, I would not describe myself as somebody that I'm not really a New York City girl. Like I like New York City, but I don't know that I'd love like living there and all the hustle bustle 24/7. So So I came back home and, I started doing the job hunt. And my first job was really working for a trade association in DC. And I was a writer on their magazine. So I was hired to really, help write and edit and do different things related to the magazine. Because at the time, I also thought, all right, I still want to, use my skills, but I know I don't want to work for a newspaper. I really wanted to head more the magazine route. And so that's what I did. And then I did that for a couple years, and then I decided to kind of jump out on my own and do freelancing because I wanted to get into more human interest stories. So I started writing for Bethesda Magazine and Frederick Magazine, Maryland Life, a bunch of different publications like that. And it really just opened up a whole new kind of world to me. But during that time, because I was, it was like my first crack at being self-employed, and I was living at home with my parents, so I could make that work. I still needed to get some more work though, and I ended up working for a marketing firm in Annapolis, and it was kind of when the light bulb went off for me, really, that I could still use, my writing and my skills in a totally different way. It was like equally creative and challenging, just kind of in this other dimension. And, when you're in journalism, I don't know if it's still like this, but when I was kind of like in the throngs of that, it's like you can't go over to marketing or PR. That's like the dark side, that's evil, basically. And so, you're kind of conditioned to think like I can't do those other things. But I found like I really liked it. If you could swing from like hard hitting news to then, marketing copy for, I think one of the first things I wrote was marketing copy for a yacht broker. Like this was like a completely different concept to me.
Yeah.
But to the challenge, right? I love the challenge of sort of understanding the demographics. How do you communicate? How do you correlate all that? And so that really gave me, I think, my first taste of, okay, I could do something a little bit different. And then my subsequent, job opportunities were all then really in like marketing, communications, some derivative kind of that. And I got further down the rabbit hole, and here we are.
Yeah. And here we are. Um, what is something about your work that people often misunderstand or overlook?
I think that sometimes, well, I think there's probably a couple things, but people easily interchange marketing and branding and public relations as though they're sort of all the same thing. And, you know, there are nuances to each of them. I think a lot of times, like with any industry, right? People don't necessarily appreciate like the time and the research and the energy that kind of goes into creating something. And that it's not just like, I can't just wave a magic wand, I think, Um, the other thing I tell people a lot is that, no amount of like marketing and PR is going to save like a severely flawed product or company. When there are very troubled issues within an organization, the marketing and PR is not going to be able to save that. And people can, suss out when you are not being genuine and authentic. And so I think it's, people just need to have the realistic, I think, expectation of what that looks like.
Yeah, that totally makes sense. You mean you can't just wave a magic wand and
I would love to. See, some of the crazy requests I've gotten, I think people think I must have a magic
yeah,
wand. But yeah, I mean, I wish I could. Like if it were that simple, I mean, I'd be all about it. I'd gladly do it for you, but I don't
yeah,
have the magic wand.
yeah. Well, it sounds like in your role as an entrepreneur and as a business owner, you have the opportunity to do a lot of problem solving, and you are clearly a very creative person, and you're getting to use your creativity in different ways, not just generating ideas and content, but helping organizations think about how they talk about themselves and what that looks like. So it seems like it's really brought together a lot of your skills and interests into one piece.
For sure. I mean, I love it. I wouldn't, to be honest, I would not trade it for the world. I think that, it was important that I had the opportunity to work in-house for a lot of different organizations before I jumped out on my own. But I also think too that really where I've seen, businesses be the most successful is when they can have that story, that narrative, that it's not just like spin or marketing fodder, but that it's true, that it's authentic, that it represents the soul of their organization. When like you know who you are and you know how to tell your story and you weave that narrative kind of throughout every layer, internally and externally, there's really not any competition for you, because most of the time, especially in like aging services, everybody kind of offers the same thing, relatively speaking. I mean, there's nuance to that, there's slight differences, but by and large, when consumers are sort of looking into aging services, we're all doing the same kind of thing. It's not so much what we're offering as it is how we're offering it. And I think that's kind of the distinction. And so when you can get past sort of all the buzzwords, from an industry perspective that often consumers can't appreciate or don't understand, then it's like, well, what really makes the difference? And it's the culture and the people that ultimately make the difference. So you have to figure out, how does that story help play into that? That again, we're not just creating stuff and making stuff up just to sell, a unit or a condo or to get mom or dad into rehab, like that. It becomes really part of the fabric of the organization. And I think that's the greatest difference. And that's what I really enjoy working on. I mean, I love that, I can be at the 30,000-foot level in strategy, and then I can dive down to, the 30-foot level of something very tactical to help. I like living more in the strategy, but I love that I have the dexterity to do both. And I think that frankly, that helps though too, when you need to go and operationalize something. Because if you don't understand that, like if you're only a big picture person, but you don't understand how to operationalize this wonderful vision, like it'll fall flat. Like we won't know what to do. So I think being able to swing kind of back and forth between those has really helped me a lot in my career.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I'm curious if there's someone watching who um, is like, wow, I would love to work in kind of marketing or communications or PR, or I would love to find a way to start my own company that is supporting aging services organizations in some way. What advice would you give them?
So I'd say that, there's no one direct track to any of those things. I think it kind of comes down to some of the nuances and variables of what you're really interested in. So, I didn't study marketing in school. I studied writing, and I have always long said that, if you can write well, you can do anything. I still believe that because it's seemingly and increasingly rare. Now we're all like turning to AI, and while AI puts together some very nice things, everybody starts to sound the same through that lens. So I'd say that that's the first thing, but also kind of looking at it like you don't have to, I think, say today, you know what, I'm only going to do journalism, or I'm only going to do PR, or I'm only going to do this, because you might find that over time, as you get into that, things change, or maybe you prefer one discipline over another. And I think that that's okay. I think it really comes back to, are you, a critical thinker, right? And if you can think critically and you can kind of connect those dots for people, then some of the discipline of that matters less. So, you can get a degree in a lot of different things, but that really comes down to, again, what's going to be best for you. I'm probably like a bit of an anomaly in that I do use my undergraduate degree. I was fairly certain of what I wanted to do. My path there turned out a little bit differently. But I think there's lots of opportunities. And then as it pertains to kind of aging services, I would encourage people to really explore that and take a hard look at it, because number one, it's a growing need. All of us are aging, and we all have loved ones that are in that scenario. And I think, regardless of your background, your socioeconomic status, everyone could say, like, we want our parents or our grandparents to be in a place where they're aging well and they're thriving in whatever phase of life that is. And that's part of what aging services can do. No industry is perfect. We certainly have, our warts and things that we need to work on. But I think there's a real opportunity. And I think there can be a lot of enthusiasm with, newer folks coming into the industry and also having a fresh perspective on that. I didn't work in aging services before I started in it. And so I mean, I probably annoyed people a lot because I was like, why? Why do we do this? Why do we do that? But, I think having an outsider's perspective is actually very valuable. And it sort of, it forces people to have to explain something, even if like they've thought that or explained it a million times over to themselves or their internal team. It just, it presents it in a different way. So then it's like, oh, now that I think about that a little bit more, I can see, right, I can see this from a different
Mhm.
perspective and how it might be valuable. So I think, there's a lot of job opportunity, a lot of job security, frankly, within the industry, and especially at a time like this when, things are a little tumultuous in the economy and the job market. I think it's a wonderful opportunity for people to explore.
Yeah, I agree. And I think your point about um, what I heard you talking about was kind of the transferable skills, like writing, critical thinking, those are going to serve you well wherever you go. And it's interesting you brought up AI because I was going to ask you about that. I think your point around it does make us all start to sound the same, and continuing to develop your skills as a writer and whatever job you're in or role you're in can help you with not only making sure that you are communicating clearly, but if you're working in a role like marketing or communications, that you're communicating on behalf of your clients clearly and helping
Yeah.
them with that vision. So that's a really good point. Is there anything else that you would like to share before we close?
I think that's no, I mean, I think really just looking at, how you can contribute and give back and in whatever industry, and so for me, part of that is in aging services. I serve a lot of other industries as well. But I think that there is something special and different about aging services. And I think you will find there are a lot of people who are very genuine and who care very much about the work that they do, and are working very hard to make it a better place for all of us as we get older. And I think that that's something, a lot of people can get behind. So I would, again, just encourage people to explore that, and don't be afraid to try. Jumping out on your own is never easy. I mean, I did that kind of slightly once before, like I said, when I was freelancing. um, I knew I always wanted to work for myself. I just wasn't sure how I was going to make it happen. But I think that, if you're not willing to bet on yourself, then, why not, right? If you're a hard worker, if, you're that person that is always giving 150% and kind of, picking up the slack and outperforming and consistently helping companies grow and thrive, I say there's no reason why you can't go out on your own. It's intimidating and scary, but it's also exciting too. And so I think anything's possible. I'm more of an optimist,
Mhm.
you know, but I think a lot of times people just haven't been told that they have permission to do that or that they can, or
Mhm.
maybe they didn't have people that believed in them. And so I think that's probably the only other thing I'd say.
Yeah, I love that. Thank you for sharing, Courtney. Well, I so appreciate you being willing to share a bit about yourself and spark and buzz with us today. So thank you.
Thanks so much, Allison, for having me. I appreciate it.